The typeface seems to have gone from a formal object into an information object. It can have data embedded in it in a way that the punch cutter in Antwerp never could have.
You can actually start to take in data and inputs from other things and start to change its form. It can start to mirror something that its viewer might express. It can take on the characteristics of its environment in almost chameleon-like fashion. It can start to actually have a kind of intelligence to it and a kind of consciousness.
The term generative typography is interesting, and I think that it perhaps needs a lot of discussion.
One of the things that's interesting is that typography is never fixed.
You might see type that's printed in ink as being somewhat liquid or elastic because the way that it's printed on the page, isn't the exact form of the punch that is yielding it. So in that sense, it generates a new form.
Typography is always something where you describe up front the rules, where someone else or a machine or a program or whatever will generate the end result.
Type is never the thing itself. Type itself is a transparent channel.
When you construe it kind of philosophically, it's something that all typography is generative to some extent. It's almost more a question of determining to what extent is it generative and how self-conscious is it about its own generation.
There's been, a really great history of kind of inspiration around generative typography and sort of typographic variants in the kind of recent past and also sort of in the very early history of typography. All the way back to Albrecht Dürer, you have this kind of sense of modularity in typography.
I see a lot of actually environmental typography. That does not necessarily change its form all the time. However, the way that it engages the particular material changes your perception about the material itself and also changes the perception or the reading of the content.
Taking that a bit further, and Lederer doing the sort of work they did for the Twin Cities Design Festival with the typeface Twin, where it kind of responded to elements of the weather and sort of somehow reflected a condition that wasn't just the condition of ink on paper or pixels on a screen, but rather the kind of ambient conditions of an environment.
Rules have been dictating the output. It started in 1985 when PostScript and the first pages came. It's just that the result of it got frozen in material, in paper and in static books, and now it's dynamic through the whole series of operating systems and platforms and page ratios and sizes.
Rather than just sort of like a set of punches and chisels, we now have a set of APIs that we can use to program a typeface. You sort of open a typeface up and you can hack it, give it a different range of expressions. There's a kind of markup to the form that is sort of fungible and more kind of movable. Its materiality and its formality are not tied to one another, and I think that that's actually a really a new thing.
It's the difference from making it typography as an art form, making it as a process.
Which I think actually opens up a lot of design possibilities, as well as how we define graphic design.
So the question is sort of like, how does it open up? Where does it go from here?
Generative typography can, I think, potentially expands the experience of reading, because reading and seeing are separable. And I think that generative typography has the ability to actually constantly merge seeing and reading simultaneously. So information can become pictorial in a split second. And I think that changes the experience of understanding a particular piece of content.
The way we read, it's easy to get very much like a grammarian about typography and kind of make these normative claims about serifs are more readable. People read totally hacked up grammar many decades and centuries ago, and they got along just fine. So I think the same is true for our ability to kind of learn new typographies.
What's the future of generative typography? I don't know, actually.
You could see, for example, connections between typography and performance, the use of the keyboard, for example, like prepared piano and Fluxus. Ideas about like chance operations within kind of modernist composition. Some of these ideas may find their way into typography.
What would be a great thing is that, for instance, if a font would be aware of the size that it's going to be used in and the resolution it's going to be used in, or what the spacing is, for instance. If they all would work together, there's a great opportunity to make fantastic typography.
Well, I mean, the end game of it, or the end game of one logic of that, which may or may not be interesting. If we think about the idea of making a unique form for every human being in the world, I mean, theoretically, one could have a variation of a typeface in which every single version of it is unique, and every human has a kind of typeface in which they speak typographically in all forms, and that itself might change over time, and with their own kind of growth as an individual and as a person, eventually becoming thinner and thinner over time, and eventually becoming extinct.
Technology doesn't prevent that. It's more that people have such a limited view that a font is a set of characters, is a set of shapes that behave in a certain way. It's only a fraction what we could do with technology.
It's still in a kind of very niched area, being experimented and being considered by typographers or technologists, so on and so forth. And I think that in that context, a lot of times it becomes just sort of a thing itself. It disengages from the content and it disengages from the larger world. I'm hoping that it will become more and more common thing, that people will begin to kind of understand how reading and seeing can happen simultaneously.